I walked through my front door carrying 2 bags of groceries, and my world stopped making sense. Strangers were in my living room, unpacking boxes like they owned the place. A man I'd never met was directing traffic, pointing at my furniture like it was garbage waiting for removal. Careful with the china, he barked at a woman who must have been his wife. It's going in our dining room. My dining room. The one where my late wife and I had shared 30 years of meals together. What the hell is going on here? I dropped the grocery bags on the floor. Oranges rolled across the hardwood, scattering in every direction. Brandon, my son-in-law, appeared from the kitchen with that smile he wore when he thought he was being clever. The same smile that had charmed my daughter Leah into marrying him 2 years ago. Harold. Perfect timing. He walked over and put his hand on my shoulder like we were old friends. Dad's retiring early, and we decided this house would be perfect for them. They're moving in. The room tilted. My ears rang. I looked past Brandon to see his father, Rick, already measuring my walls with a tape measure. Please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are listening from. My name is Harold Benton, and this is the story of how my son-in-law tried to take my home, and how I made him wish he'd never set foot inside it. 6 months earlier, everything had been different. Better. Or at least I thought so. My wife Margaret had been gone for 8 months. Cancer took her fast, too fast for me to really say goodbye. The house felt enormous without her, every room echoing with memories I couldn't escape. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and reach for her side of the bed, finding only cold sheets. When Leah called asking if she and Brandon could stay with me, just for a few months, while they saved for their own house, I'd said yes immediately. Too quickly, probably. I was lonely and desperate for company, for voices that weren't just echoes of the past. They moved in on a Saturday morning. Brandon carried boxes with a smile, complimented the house, asked about Margaret's garden. He mowed the lawn that first weekend without being asked. Leah cooked her mother's recipes, and for the first time in months, the kitchen smelled like home again. "This is really generous of you, Harold," Brandon said over dinner that first week. "We'll be out of your hair before you know it." 6 months tops. I believed him. God help me, I actually believed him. Looking back now, I can see how carefully they played it. The gratitude was performance. The helpfulness was strategy. They were mapping my weaknesses, finding the cracks in my loneliness, learning exactly how to break me. The changes started small. So small I almost didn't notice at first. New curtains appeared in the living room one afternoon. Modern ones, gray and minimalist, nothing like the floral patterns Margaret had chosen. When I asked about it, Brandon shrugged. "The old ones were pretty worn out, Harold. These brighten up the space. Don't you think?" I didn't think that at all, but I nodded anyway. It seemed petty to complain about curtains. Then the chairs in the den disappeared, replaced by sleek leather ones that looked expensive and felt uncomfortable. The family photos on the mantel got reorganized into a storage box in the garage. Brandon said he was decluttering to help me move forward with my grief. But it was the armchair that broke something inside me. Margaret's chair, the one she'd sat in every evening while reading. Faded green fabric, worn armrests, a permanent indent where she'd curled her legs beneath her. I came home from the grocery store one Tuesday to find it gone. "Where's the green chair?" I asked Leah, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked uncomfortable. "Brandon donated it to Goodwill. He said it was old and taking up space. Dad, it was falling apart." "It was your mother's chair." "I know, but..." She trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. "We can get you a new one." I didn't want a new one. I wanted Margaret's chair. But I said nothing, just walked to my bedroom and closed the door. My chest felt tight, my throat thick with words I couldn't say. Brandon's parents showed up on a Friday afternoon for what was supposed to be a weekend visit. Rick and Darlene arrived in a truck loaded with more belongings than any weekend trip required. Plants, framed photographs, even a small dog they hadn't mentioned owning. "Just a quick visit," Darlene said, though her eyes were already scanning my house like she was taking measurements. They walked through every room, commenting on everything. The kitchen was dated but fixable. The master bedroom had good bones. The backyard was perfect for entertaining. Rick stood in the living room that evening, hands on his hips, nodding to himself. "This would make one hell of a retirement spot," he said to Brandon. "Quiet neighborhood, good square footage, plenty of room." Brandon met his father's eyes and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone closing a deal. I felt cold despite the warm evening. Something was happening here, something planned and coordinated. They weren't just visiting. They were evaluating, measuring, claiming. That night, I heard them through the walls of my own house, talking about paint colors and furniture arrangements, talking about my home like I wasn't even there, like I'd already disappeared. I found Leah alone in the kitchen the next morning. She was making coffee, her movements careful and quiet. "Leah, are Brandon's parents planning to move in here?" She froze, the coffee pot halfway to her cup. "What? No. Dad, they're just visiting. They brought a lot of stuff for a weekend visit. They always overpack." She still wouldn't look at me. "You know how older people are." "I am older," I said quietly, "and I know the difference between visiting and scouting." She finally met my eyes and I saw guilt there. Real painful guilt. She knew something. She'd known all along. "Dad, they just love it here. That's all." Brandon appeared in the doorway before I could respond. His expression changed when he saw us talking, going from relaxed to alert in an instant. "Everything okay?" he asked, but he was looking at Leah, not me. "Fine," I said. "Just talking about coffee." That night, I heard Brandon through the wall, his voice low and sharp. "Don't upset Leah with your paranoid questions, Harold. We're family now. You should be grateful we're even here, keeping you company. Most people your age end up alone in nursing homes." The threat was clear even if he didn't say it directly. "Behave or we'll put you somewhere else. This is our house now and you're just living in it." The gaslighting started in earnest after that weekend. Small things designed to make me question my own mind. I'd find doors locked that I knew I'd left open. My car keys would disappear, only to turn up in places I'd never put them. Brandon would mention it to Leah in my hearing. "Your dad left his keys in the refrigerator again," he'd say, shaking his head with false concern. "We should probably keep an eye on that." I hadn't left my keys in the refrigerator. I knew I hadn't. But how do you prove something like that? How do you defend yourself against someone rewriting reality? One morning I came downstairs to find the front door wide open. Brandon was standing there with his phone, taking a picture. "Harold, you left the door open all night. Anyone could have walked in. This is serious." "I locked that door before bed. I always lock it." "Are you sure?" His voice was gentle, condescending. "Maybe you're just forgetting things. It happens at your age." Later, I heard him on the phone with someone, probably his mother. "Yeah, he's showing signs. Forgetfulness, confusion. We might need to start thinking about options." Options? The word made my blood run cold. They were building a case, constructing a narrative where I was incompetent, unable to care for myself, unable to live in my own home. They called it a family dinner, but it felt like an ambush. Brandon's parents had extended their weekend visit into a full week, and Brandon insisted we all eat together that Friday night. I sat at the head of my own table, surrounded by people who were plotting against me. Rick carved the roast like he was the host. Darlene directed Leah on where to set the dishes. Brandon poured wine for everyone except me. "You've had enough, Harold," he said when I reached for the bottle. "Don't want you getting confused later." Halfway through the meal, Brandon stood up with his glass raised. "I want to make a toast," he announced. "To new beginnings and to finally having everyone under one roof. This house has been lonely for too long. Now it'll be full of family again." Rick and Darlene beamed, raising their glasses. Leah forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I set down my fork, my appetite gone completely. They meant my roof. My house. The home Margaret and I had built together, filled with 30 years of memories they were systematically erasing. I excused myself before dessert, mumbling something about being tired. Nobody tried to stop me. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I heard Rick say, "Poor old guy. Probably doesn't even understand what's happening." But I understood perfectly. And that was the problem they hadn't anticipated. That night, I sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, staring at the empty chair where Margaret used to sit. The house was quiet except for the sound of Rick snoring in the guest room, Brandon and Leah asleep in what used to be our spare bedroom. "You know what to do," I whispered to the empty chair. "You always knew how to handle people like this." Then I remembered something Margaret had said years ago, back when we dealt with a dishonest contractor trying to overcharge us. She'd smiled that knowing smile of hers and said, "Be smarter than cruel people, Harold. They can't fight what they don't see coming." I sat up straighter. She was right. Brandon thought he'd won because I'd been passive, because grief had made me soft and easy to manipulate. He expected me to roll over, to accept their takeover without a fight. But Margaret hadn't raised a quitter. And I hadn't survived 68 years by being stupid. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. But it would be fought on my terms in ways they'd never anticipate. I'd let them think they were winning right up until the moment they lost everything. I pulled out my phone and started making a list. First item, call Margaret's lawyer in the morning. Second item, Start documenting everything. Third item. Make them believe they'd already won. The best trap is the one your enemy walks into with a smile on their face. Thomas Garrett had been Margaret's lawyer for 20 years. He'd handled our wills, our estate planning, everything. When I called his office Monday morning, he fit me in that same afternoon. I sat in his leather chair and told him everything. The gradual invasion, the gaslighting, the plans I'd overheard. He listened without interrupting, taking notes, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he leaned back and tapped his pen against his notepad. Harold, what you're describing is elder abuse. We could pursue criminal charges. I don't want charges, I said. I want my house protected. I want them out. And I want them to never see it coming. Thomas smiled then, the same smile Margaret used to get when she was planning something clever. I think we can arrange that. But you'll need to play along for a while longer. Can you do that? I spent 30 years married to the smartest woman I ever met, I replied. I learned a few things about patience. Over the next 2 hours, Thomas explained the plan. We'd create a trust, transfer the house into it with me as the beneficiary until my death, then to my grandson. The trust would be irrevocable and airtight. I'd still live there, still control it, but legally I wouldn't own it anymore. More importantly, Brandon couldn't take it. Couldn't manipulate me into signing it over. Couldn't claim I was incompetent and seize control. The house would be untouchable. How long until the paperwork is ready? I asked. 3 days. Then we just need your signature. Make it 2, I said. I don't know how much time I have before they make their move. I went home and started playing the part they expected. Tired, confused, compliant. I let Brandon help me with simple tasks I could easily do myself. I asked Leah to remind me of things I hadn't actually forgotten. I moved slower, spoke softer, acted like a man who was giving up. Brandon ate it up. His confidence grew with each day, his mask slipping further. He stopped pretending to be polite. He'd walk into rooms without knocking, make decisions about my house without asking, talk over me like I wasn't there. One evening, I heard him on the phone in what used to be my study. Yeah, the old man's definitely declining. Probably have him moved out within a month. Then we can really fix this place up. Update the kitchen, knock out that wall, turn his bedroom into a home office. I stood in the hallway, my phone in my pocket, recording every word. Evidence. Ammunition. Proof of their intentions when the time came. Leah noticed the change in me during dinner that week. Dad, are you feeling okay? You seem different. Quieter. Just tired, honey, I said, giving her a weak smile. Getting old, I guess. She looked worried, but Brandon jumped in before she could say more. He's fine, babe. Just needs more rest. Right, Harold? Right? I agreed, playing my part perfectly. Brandon relaxed, convinced he'd won. That was exactly what I wanted him to think. The paperwork was ready on Wednesday. I drove to Thomas's office while Brandon and Leah were at work, Rick and Darlene out shopping for God knows what. I signed every document, my hand steady despite my racing heart. The house is now held in trust for your grandson, Thomas confirmed, sliding the final page into a folder. You retain all rights to live here and make decisions about the property until your death. But ownership cannot be transferred, sold, or claimed by anyone else. It's protected. And if Brandon tries to have me declared incompetent? The trust was created while you were demonstrably of sound mind. I've documented our conversations, your clear understanding of the situation, your strategic planning. Any attempt to claim otherwise would fail in court. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized was there. The house was safe. Margaret's memory was safe. My grandson's inheritance was protected from vultures. When do we spring the trap? I asked. That's up to you. But I'd suggest letting them make their move first. Let them show their true colors completely. That way, when it all falls apart, they'll have no one to blame but themselves. I drove home with the documents locked in my car trunk, hidden where Brandon would never think to look. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The war wasn't over. But I just won the most important battle. Leah noticed the change in me over the next few days. I wasn't acting confused anymore, wasn't moving as slowly. I caught her watching me with puzzled concern during breakfast one morning. Dad, you seem better. More like yourself. I am feeling better, I said honestly. Maybe I just needed some time. Brandon overheard from the other room and came to investigate. He studied my face, looking for signs of whatever he'd thought he'd seen. Finding me alert and clear-eyed seemed to confuse him. Maybe you should still take it easy, Harold, he said carefully. Don't want you overdoing it. I'll be fine, I replied, meeting his eyes steadily. Better than fine, actually. Something flickered in his expression. Uncertainty. Maybe a hint of worry. Good. Let him wonder. Let him second guess. Rick and Darlene were less subtle about their concern. They'd been treating the house like their own for weeks now, moving furniture, making small changes, acting like owners in waiting. Seeing me alert and engaged threw off their confidence. Maybe we should head home soon, Darlene mentioned to Rick one evening. We've imposed long enough. But Brandon stopped them. No, stay. Harold doesn't mind. Do you, Harold? Stay as long as you like, I said with a smile that made Brandon's eyes narrow. What's mine is yours, right? Isn't that what you said? That night, I heard them arguing in hushed voices. They knew something had changed. They just didn't know what. And that uncertainty was exactly what I wanted. On Friday morning, I announced I was taking a short trip to visit an old friend upstate. Brandon's face lit up like Christmas morning. That's great, Harold. You should get out more, enjoy yourself. How long will you be gone? Just a few days. Maybe a week. Depends on how it goes. Take all the time you need, he said, practically pushing me toward the door. We'll hold down the fort here. Leah hugged me goodbye at the door, her embrace lasting longer than usual. Be safe, Dad. Call me when you get there. I will, honey. I drove away with a suitcase and my phone, watching the house disappear in my rearview mirror. But I didn't drive upstate. I drove exactly 6 miles to a motel on the edge of town, checked in under cash and waited. Thomas had given me the number for a private investigator he trusted. I called her from the motel room. I need someone watching my house, I explained. Video documentation of everything that happens while I'm gone. Especially if anyone tries to move in or change the locks. Consider it done, Mr. Benton. I'll have someone there within the hour. I spent that first evening in the motel room, eating takeout and watching mindless television. Around 9, my phone buzzed with a text from the investigator. Just a photo at first, no caption needed. A moving truck was parked in my driveway. Rick and Darlene were directing movers carrying furniture into my house. Brandon was standing on my porch, laughing at something his father said. The second photo showed them carrying boxes into my bedroom. My bedroom. Margaret's bedroom. I called Thomas. It's happening. They're moving in. Perfect, he said. Let them. The more they do, the worse it'll be for them when this ends. The investigator sent updates every few hours. Each one made my blood pressure rise, but I forced myself to stay calm. To wait. To let them hang themselves with their own rope. Rick and Darlene had taken over the master bedroom, moving my belongings to the smallest bedroom upstairs. My clothes were in trash bags in the hallway. Margaret's photos had been taken down and replaced with pictures of Brandon's family. The living room furniture had been rearranged. My books were in boxes in the garage. The kitchen had new dishes, new curtains, new everything. Brandon had changed the locks. The investigator caught him on video, installing new deadbolts on both doors, pocketing the only set of keys with a satisfied grin. Finally, he said to his father in the video, clearly audible. Finally, this place feels like ours. Leah appeared in some of the footage, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. She watched them pack up my life, watched them erase Margaret's memory, and she stayed silent. That hurt worse than anything Brandon had done. On the third day, I received a video that made me smile despite my anger. Rick was walking through the house in my bathrobe, Margaret's bathrobe that I'd kept because it still smelled like her. He was wearing it and laughing about how, the old man, had finally given up. Time to make the call, Thomas said when I forwarded him everything. Tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. Be ready. I barely slept that night. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow they'd learn what happened when you tried to steal from someone smarter than you thought they were. I arrived at my house at 7:55 a.m. The investigator's van was parked down the street, camera rolling. Thomas was waiting in his car with the police officers he'd arranged to meet us. Everything was ready. I walked up to my own front door and knocked. Knocked on the door of the house I'd owned for 30 years, that Margaret and I had made a home. Rick answered, wearing my bathrobe. When he saw me, his face went from confused to arrogant in seconds. Who are you? He sneered like he didn't know exactly who I was. I live here, I said calmly. I'd like to come in. I don't think so. This is private property. You need to leave before I call the police. That won't be necessary, I said, stepping aside. They're already here. 2 uniformed officers appeared behind me, along with Thomas carrying his briefcase full of documents. Rick's face went pale as paper. Officer Williams, who I'd known since he was a kid in the neighborhood, stepped forward. Sir, this man owns this property. You need to exit immediately. That's impossible, Rick sputtered. Harold Benton signed it over too. Harold Benton signed nothing, Thomas interrupted, pulling out the trust documents. This house is held in an irrevocable trust. Mr. Benton is the sole beneficiary with exclusive rights to residence. You are trespassing. Brandon appeared behind his father, still in pajamas. When he saw the police, the color drained from his face. There's been a misunderstanding. Harold invited us. I invited you to stay temporarily, I said, my voice hard. I never gave you permission to change my locks, move my belongings, or take over my home. That's called theft. And in case you're wondering, it's all been documented. I pulled out my phone and showed them the investigators' photos. Every moment, every change, every cruel laugh they'd shared thinking I'd never know. You have 1 hour to remove your belongings, Officer Williams announced. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. And Mr. Benton has the right to press charges for illegal eviction and theft. This is insane. Darlene's voice came from inside the house. She appeared in designer clothes I recognized from Margaret's closet. You can't just throw us out. We have rights. Actually, ma'am, you don't, Officer Martinez, the second officer, replied. You have no legal standing here. The property owner is asking you to leave. If you refuse, we'll arrest you for trespassing. Thomas had arranged for a moving company to be ready. They arrived within minutes, professional and efficient. I watched as they carried Rick and Darlene's belongings out to the lawn, box by box, piece by piece. The neighbors had started to gather, curious about the police presence and moving trucks. Mrs. Chun from next door had her phone out, recording everything. Brandon noticed and tried to hide his face, but it was too late. Please, Darlene begged, turning to me. Harold, be reasonable. We have nowhere to go. You have your own home, I replied. The one you claimed you were retiring from. Go back to it. Rick tried a different approach, getting angry. You're making a huge mistake, old man. You're going to regret this. The only mistake I made was trusting your son, I said. And I've learned from it. Within 2 hours, everything they'd brought was on the lawn. The locks were changed back by a locksmith I'd hired. The police stayed until Rick and Darlene's car was packed and pulled away from the curb. But Brandon and Leah remained. They stood in the now empty driveway looking shell-shocked. Brandon's usual confidence had evaporated completely. He looked smaller somehow, defeated. I need to speak with my wife, he said to the officers. Alone. That's our right. Your wife can make that choice, Officer Williams replied, looking at Leah. Ma'am? Leah stood frozen between her husband and her father, her face wet with tears. For a long moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she walked toward me. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think Brandon could. Could you steal from your own father? I finished. Could manipulate and gaslight a grieving man? Could you try to take everything your mother and I built? She nodded, sobbing now. Brandon started toward her, but Officer Martinez stepped between them. Sir, I think it's best if you leave the property now. Leah. Brandon's voice was desperate, angry. Leah, come on. We're leaving together. Tell him. But Leah shook her head. No, I'm staying here. I need time to think about everything. You can't be serious. After everything I've done for you? Everything you've done for me? Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. You tried to steal my father's house. You locked him out of his own home. You wore my mother's bathrobe like some kind of trophy. Brandon's face twisted with rage. Your father manipulated you. He planned all of this. Can't you see? He's playing victim and you're falling for it. The only person who manipulated anyone is you, I said quietly. Now get off my property before I press charges. By noon, the story had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Mrs. Chen's recording went viral on the local community Facebook page. By evening, it had been picked up by a local news blog. Son-in-law attempts to steal father-in-law's home, gets evicted by police. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors offering support, from old friends who'd heard what happened, from Margaret's book club ladies who wanted to bring me casseroles in righteous anger. But the real damage was to Brandon's reputation. He ran a small consulting business that depended on trust and relationships. By the next morning, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that 3 of his clients had called to terminate their contracts. Someone had sent them the video. Someone had made sure they knew exactly what kind of person they were working with. I didn't ask who. I didn't want to know. But I suspected Mrs. Chen had a bigger network than I'd realized. Brandon tried calling Leah dozens of times that day. She blocked his number after the first 5 calls. He showed up at the house once, but the new security cameras I'd installed caught him approaching the door, and I called the police before he could knock. If he comes back, Officer Williams told me, we can get you a restraining order. Just say the word. I nodded, watching Brandon drive away in his expensive car that he probably couldn't afford without the house he'd been planning to steal. Leah stayed in her old bedroom, the one she'd lived in before college. She barely spoke for the first 2 days, just moved through the house like a ghost. I gave her space, understanding that she was processing a betrayal that cut deep. On the third evening, she found me in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower bed Margaret had planted years ago. I should have known, she said, sitting on the bench beside where I worked. The signs were there. The way he talked about money, about your house. The way he looked at you sometimes, like you were an obstacle instead of a person. Love makes us blind sometimes, I replied, sitting back on my heels. Your mother told me that once. She said people show you who they really are, but we don't always want to see it. How did you know? How did you figure it out before it was too late? I smiled sadly. Because I was paying attention. And because your mother taught me to trust my instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. She cried then, really cried, and I held her the way I had when she was little and the world seemed too big and scary. Some pain you have to feel all the way through. There's no shortcut around it. I'm getting a divorce, she said later, her voice steady despite the tears. I can't be married to someone who would do this. Not to you. Not to Mom's memory. That's your choice to make, I said. But whatever you decide, you'll always have a home here. That's never going to change. The next few weeks were hard. Leah moved her belongings out of the apartment she'd shared with Brandon, cutting ties piece by piece. His parents called the house repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate messages about how we'd ruined their retirement plans and destroyed their son's life. I saved every message. Evidence in case they tried anything else. Brandon attempted to contact Leah through mutual friends, sending flowers and apology letters that she threw away without reading. His social media presence disappeared after someone posted the full video of the eviction, complete with audio of him laughing about taking over the old man's house. His business failed completely within a month. Turns out, people don't want to work with someone who tried to steal from their own family. Rick and Darlene blamed Leah for everything. They called her, sent her emails, even showed up at her work once until security escorted them out. They claimed she'd manipulated me against them, that she'd turned a son against his parents. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. Thomas helped Leah file for divorce and got a restraining order against Brandon when he showed up at her work, drunk and angry. The divorce would take months to finalize, but the separation was immediate and absolute. She changed her name back to Benton. She said she wanted to remember who she'd been before Brandon, before the manipulation and lies. I understood that completely. Slowly, the house began to feel like home again. Not the same as when Margaret was alive. Nothing would ever be quite the same. But peaceful. Quiet in a good way, not a lonely way. I rehung Margaret's photos in the living room. I put her armchair back where it belonged, ordering an exact replica online after Goodwill couldn't find the original. I planted new flowers in her garden, bringing color back to spaces that had been neglected. Leah helped me sort through the changes Brandon had made, undoing each one carefully. We threw away his modern curtains and found replacements that matched Margaret's style. We rearranged the furniture back to where it belonged. One evening, she found me standing in the living room, just looking at everything we'd restored. It looks right again, she said softly. It does, I agreed. It finally does. We had dinner together most nights, cooking recipes from Margaret's old cookbook, telling stories about her, keeping her memory alive in a way that felt healthy instead of haunted. The house stopped feeling like a battlefield and started feeling like a home again. The peace I felt was better than any victory, sweeter than any revenge. Brandon had tried to take everything, but he'd failed. And in failing, he'd lost far more than he tried to steal. Brandon showed up one last time on a Saturday morning in October. Leah was out shopping, so I was alone when the doorbell rang. He looked terrible. Unshaven, weight lost, eyes hollow in a way that spoke of sleepless nights and consequences finally catching up. His expensive car was gone, replaced by an older sedan with a dent in the bumper. What do you want? I asked through the screen door, not opening it fully. He swallowed hard. You didn't have to ruin me. The business, the reputation, everything. You could have just kicked us out and been done with it. You did that yourself, I replied evenly. Every choice, every action, every lie. That was all you. I was trying to take care of my family. To secure our future. By stealing mine? By manipulating your own wife's grief? By trying to take the home where her mother died. I shook my head. That's not taking care of family. That's destroying it. He looked at me for a long moment and I saw something break in his expression. The last piece of denial, maybe. The final excuse falling away. I'm sorry, he whispered. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix what you broke, I said. But maybe it's a start toward fixing yourself. I closed the door gently but firmly. Through the window, I watched him walk back to his car, shoulders slumped, looking smaller than when he'd arrived. I never saw him again. Months passed, turning into a year. Leah stayed living with me and we developed a new rhythm. She got promoted at her job, started dating someone new, carefully, slowly, having learned hard lessons about trust. She seemed happier, lighter, like someone who'd put down a weight she hadn't known she was carrying. One afternoon, she came to me with tears in her eyes, holding her phone. Brandon's parents tried to sue me, she said, for emotional distress. They claimed I abandoned their son and cost them their retirement home. What happened? The judge threw it out in 5 minutes. Thomas sent them a letter afterward, threatening countersuits if they ever contacted us again. She laughed, but it was shaky. They actually thought they could win. Some people never learn, I said. They just keep doubling down on their mistakes, hoping reality will eventually agree with them. She nodded, tucking her phone away. I brought you something. She handed me an envelope. It's from my divorce lawyer. Everything's final. Inside was the decree, stamped and official. 2 years of marriage, ended by her signature and a judge's approval. She was free. How do you feel? I asked. Like I can breathe again, she said simply. Like I got a second chance. We all deserve second chances, I told her. Your mother believed that. She'd be proud of how strong you've been. I learned from the best, she said, hugging me tight. Both of you. That evening we sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, exactly the way Margaret had always loved it. Dad, Leah said after a while, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. What happens to this house eventually? I mean when, in the future. I smiled, pulling out the envelope I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment. That's actually something I wanted to talk to you about. I handed her the trust documents. She read through them slowly, her eyes widening as she understood what she was seeing. This house is in trust for my grandson, I explained. Your son. The baby you're going to have someday or adopt, however you choose to build your family. It'll skip your generation entirely and go straight to him. Leah's hands shook as she held the papers. You did this before Brandon tried to take the house? I did it because of Brandon trying to take the house. The trust protects it from anyone who might try what he did. Your son will inherit this house, these memories, this piece of your mother's legacy. And nobody can take that away. But what if I never have children? What if? Then it goes to your cousin's kids. Or to a charity in your mother's name. The point is, it stays in the family where it belongs. It doesn't get stolen, doesn't get manipulated away, doesn't become a prize for people like Brandon and his parents. She cried then, clutching the papers to her chest. Mom would love this. She'd love knowing her home was protected. She'd love knowing you're here, safe and strong and rebuilding your life, I said. That's what she'd care about most. We sat in silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear. The house behind us glowed with warm light from the windows. Inside were Margaret's photos, her garden visible from the kitchen, her chair in the living room, all the pieces of a life well lived and a love that hadn't ended even when she did. Thank you, Leah whispered, for fighting for this, for fighting for us. That's what family does, I replied. Real family. Not the kind that tries to take what isn't theirs, but the kind that protects what matters most. 2 years after that terrible day when I found strangers unpacking in my living room, I sat on the same porch where this story began. The morning sun was warm, my coffee was hot, and the house behind me was filled with the sound of laughter. Leah was inside with her new partner, Alex, someone who treated her like she deserved and looked at me with respect instead of calculation. They were planning their wedding, simple and small, just the way Leah wanted it. Her son, my grandson, was due in 6 months. The nursery was already painted, in a room where Margaret used to sew. The garden was thriving, better than it had been in years. Mrs. Chen had helped me plant new varieties, and we'd added a bench with Margaret's name engraved on it. The neighborhood kids sometimes sat there doing homework, and I liked to think she would have enjoyed that. Brandon's last letter had come 3 months ago. Not begging or threatening, just resigned. He'd moved to another state, taken a job in his father's old company, started over somewhere where nobody knew what he'd done. His parents had sold their house, downsized dramatically, the retirement they dreamed of in my home replaced by a small condo and minimum wage jobs. I didn't take pleasure in their suffering. But I didn't regret it either. They'd made their choices. I just made sure those choices had consequences. The house that Brandon had declared perfect for his parents stood behind me, protected and peaceful. The home he tried to steal remained exactly where it belonged, with the family who'd built it, loved it, and fought for it. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app one last time. 4 weeks, I'd been adding to this story, documenting everything that had happened. Not for revenge, but for remembrance. For my grandson, so he'd understand someday why his inheritance was protected the way it was. I added one final line. They thought they'd found the perfect home. They were right, it just wasn't for them. This house was built on love, protected by loyalty, and secured for the family who deserves it. Brandon tried to take it with manipulation and lies. But he learned what everyone eventually learns. You can't steal what's guarded by someone who's smarter, stronger, and more patient than you'll ever be. I saved the recording and looked back at the house. Through the window, I could see Leah laughing at something Alex said. The life insurance money Margaret had left was slowly being used to renovate the nursery, to update the kitchen she'd loved, to maintain the garden where she'd spent so many peaceful afternoons. The house wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours, mine and Leah's and the grandson who'd inherit it someday. It was Margaret's memory, preserved and protected. It was every family dinner yet to come, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday evening that would be filled with love instead of schemes. Brandon had declared my house perfect for his parents. He'd been wrong about that. But he'd been right about one thing. This house was perfect. Perfect for the people who understood that a home isn't just walls and rooms and furniture you can rearrange. It's the memories you make, the love you protect, and the legacy you leave behind for those who matter most. And that's exactly what I'd done. I protected it all. The war Brandon started was over. And I'd won it not with anger or cruelty, but with patience, planning, and the kind of quiet strength Margaret had taught me all those years ago. My name is Harold Benton. My son-in-law tried to take my home. And I turned their invasion into a lesson they'll regret for the rest of their lives. But more importantly, I turned it into a victory that my family will celebrate for generations to come. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below about a time you had to fight for what was yours. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories every week. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story about standing up, fighting back, and protecting what matters most.